Come on, give Abba the praise. Hallelujah. He is worthy. I know that you probably have noticed this talit hanging on this podium this afternoon. It's actually called a Joseph's coat. And I just want to be very, very real with you guys this afternoon. This is probably one of the most difficult words that I've ever had the opportunity to share. Abba's been cooking this, if I can use that term, in me now for a couple of months. I actually started putting the words down on paper probably 3 weeks ago. And the reason I want to share this with you is because I am Joseph. Joseph, his life spanned two different sections. The young, on fire, fervent, immature, and then finally the man that became, because of the circumstances and the trials and the tribulations of his life, the man that became the Joseph that we're going to look at in this parshah. I promise you, when you see what we're about to share this afternoon, and in fact, someone saw my notes that I didn't know, looked at them, and they're a Messianic Jew, and they made the statement, and they sent me back a message and said, you know something, this is going to stir the community, and I believe with everything in me that this is a message for the house of Israel today. And we believe that the house of Israel here represented in this country, where we're at, is the house of Joseph. The title of this Torah portion is Vayigash, and it begins in Genesis chapter 44, verse 18 through chapter 47, verse 27. And I believe that it parallels, the events in this parshah parallels the events that we're living in right now. This is a blueprint. Listen to me carefully. I hope that you're sober enough in your spirit man to understand the gravity of a sent word, because this is a sent word to us as the house that's calling ourselves Joseph, the outcasts that have been in prison for generations and now is about to be resurrected, if you will, and placed in a pinnacle position. Listen to me, Joseph is going to follow the parallel that we see in this parshah. And this story parallels the brothers of Joseph traveling down a second time into Egypt when there's been a severe famine. There is a famine coming in the land. The scripture tells us the famine of hearing the word of Abba. And anytime there's a spiritual famine, there will also be a physical, natural famine. And if that's the case, just like in Joseph's day, Joseph is going to be charged. Listen to me, house of Joseph. You are going to be charged with ensuring that those in your house, those in your family, your brothers, have gathered enough, even though they may not understand it, if we can call them brothers. And let me share this with you. Shepherd John hit the nail on the head. A lot of us in the Messianic Hebrew roots community, just like when we were in the church world, sometimes your denomination becomes your idol. And in the Hebrew roots Messianic community, the movement has become our idol, and Abba has required this of us. We're going to have to look to him as the author and the finisher of our faith. And when these brothers get down into Egypt for this second time, they still don't understand that their brother is the sovereign in the land, second only to Pharaoh. And they find themselves in a plot that I'm convinced Joseph fully understood. Joseph was a man that had spent time in the tents of Shem. He understood the Torah. Because of the wisdom that he had gleaned through the adversity that he was later allowed to go through, Joseph understood the prophetic significance, not only of what he had done, what had been required of him, but also what his brothers had done typologically as well. And not only how it would apply right then in the now that they were living in, but in a future day when the house of Israel would go into exile into Egypt. This was to set it off. This was to initiate it. But Joseph also was able to look because Joseph was a seer. He was able to look through the tunnel of time and see the day that you and I are living in and see that there was, in fact, a Joseph that is going to be raised up in the last day after the pattern of Mashiach ben Yosef. And when this Joseph is raised up, he is going to be charged with some of the very same things that he implemented in that land as we're speaking about. What transpires leads to the reunion of the entire house of Israel. Right now, there's a major chasm between the Christian community, the Jewish community, the Hebrew roots community. In this Torah portion, what I personally believe, let me just clarify something. I personally believe that the Christian church does not understand that we are Joseph. Okay? And so the major disconnect, as I see it here in this parshah, involves three distinct individuals: Joseph and Judah and the companions of each, and there's one other brother that's mentioned that's very prominent, and his name is Benjamin. And it's my opinion that Benjamin becomes the catalyst for what takes place in this particular Torah portion. There's another very peculiar twist that Joseph recognizes. It's now in hindsight looking back to what's occurred some 22 years earlier. He recognized the trouble that the extra favor that had been paid him by his father had caused, and yet how ironic that in the same vein as his father showed favor to him, Joseph intentionally, in front of his brothers, shows favor, some very powerful, peculiar, and distinct favor to Benjamin. Why? What sort of a prophetic initiative is being launched here? If we trace the tribe of Benjamin, we find that they had been almost annihilated after this incident here on down years later. You go back and look in the Judges, you'll find that the whole house of Benjamin had almost been decimated. In fact, they had been decimated to such an extent, there were no women for the nation to be propagated. And the children of Israel had to get together and say, you know, we have a major calamity here. One of our brothers is on the verge of completely being extinct. What are we going to do? Do you think maybe that we're going to face a similar situation with Benjamin in days in front of us? Could it be because of King Saul's lineage? Is it conceivable to think that Queen Esther may be part of what's shadow pictured here? She was a Benjamite. The New Testament Saul or Paul also confessed that he was himself a Benjamite. And I want you to remember, again, these three principal characters: Joseph, Judah, and Benjamin. And so I'm convinced that there's a template here, a blueprint for us to follow if we're expecting. How many of you expect to be part of the reunion of the whole house of Israel? Well, then I'm going to get into some detail that I believe will stir us. Hopefully it will get us out of our comfort zone. And I want to reiterate the fact that I am Benjamin. I believe that some of the events in my own personal life have followed along the lines of Benjamin. As a young man in the faith, I was so zealous for what I was after. Brendan, I can tell you, we felt like we would convert the whole Gulf Coast. Give us 2 weeks, we got them. 2 weeks. And we hammered, and we were in a place where we didn't have anybody else to teach us. And so we just went by what we saw in the scripture, and we believed it. We were tenacious enough to hold fast to it. And at the time, I don't mind sharing something sensitive with you. I was uncircumcised. The Holy Spirit began to deal with me about circumcision. If you're going to ever have any kind of relationship with your Jewish brothers, you need to be circumcised. And so at the ripe old age of 47, I went through that ritual. Hear me now. I understand what it was like when Abraham, 3 days later, sitting underneath the tree with his head hanging. This was in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. We had no water, no electricity. It's 90-something degrees. No way to take a bath. And I'm kind of walking like John Wayne. Pilgrim. The rabbis say that in this particular Torah portion, when the brothers come into Joseph, that the way that they finally recognize him is that Joseph speaks Hebrew, and Joseph shows them his circumcision. I believe that we've missed that. I believe that what Joseph, and Shepherd John and I were talking about it, I believe that what Joseph showed them when he brought his brothers in and he was humbled, and he extended forgiveness to his brothers, and he said, it's not your fault. It was the hand of Yahweh. And when he did that, it opened up the man called Joseph. They looked at him, and all they saw was a pharaonic, dictatorial, authoritarian figure that was hammering them just like Joseph was when he was 17 years old from his bully platform called the School of Shem. Now they're seeing a different individual. As soon as he exposes his circumcised heart, that's when the union takes place. Listen to me. You're about to get exposed. Say amen right there. You're about to get exposed. We're going to check, see if you're circumcised at the door. Ezekiel 37:16 through 19. Moreover, thou son of man, take thee one stick and write upon it for Judah and for the children of his companions. There's so much in here. It's interesting. It says here, Judah and the children of Israel, his companions. And then it says, take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel. It doesn't say children of Israel. It says house of Israel, his companions. And say unto them, thus saith Yahweh Elohim, behold, I take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel his fellows. Where's Manasseh in this parshah? And I will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. Now, if we believe that the parallels that we mentioned above are serious and true, then it would seem, as it does in this parshah, that in some fashion, sometimes we have a tendency to put Abba in a box and expect him to act a certain way. But however he decides to do it, in the days in front of us, there's going to come a famine in the earth. Did you hear me? Prior to that famine coming, there's going to be a season, and I believe we're on the cusp of that. There's going to be a season when there's going to be wealth released into the house of Joseph, and the house of Joseph is going to be tasked with doing what he did here in this particular Torah portion. Joseph is going to come into prominence in some fashion in the world, Egypt being a type or shadow picture of the world. Joseph's going to come into prominence in this day in front of us, just as Joseph did. And I seriously doubt that anybody that follows the Torah would deny that the house of Joseph, also known as the outcasts of Israel, are currently, as we speak, deeply entrenched in a spiritual Egypt. In addition, it would seem that just as there is a season of wealth afforded the house of Joseph, there's also going to come a famine that's going to affect the extended house of Joseph. Listen to me. It's not going to only affect the extended house of Joseph, but it's going to affect the house of Yehudah. And it's also going to affect the Egypt as well, which is the known world. And yet Joseph, from what I can glean here, correct me if I'm wrong, Joseph will already have been placed in a position of prominence to be prepared for this end-day season for the express purpose. Listen to me, you need to grasp this. It's not so that Joseph can close the door and say, I have built this house for me and my family alone. And if you study the Torah portion, you'll find that that's exactly what Joseph did as a young man. Joseph understood that he was the progenitor, and I'm going to show it to you in the scripture. Joseph understood that he was the progenitor of the house of Israel. He was charged with being the priest of the house and with continuing to build the family name of Yisrael. He understood that. And what Joseph began to do, because even though he was in the tents of Shem and he understood the Torah, Joseph was not seasoned enough to know how to practically and appropriately handle the Torah by times. Sounds like a lot of us that stand behind the platform, doesn't it? Hear me now. And so what Joseph did is that he began to build an exclusive house. And the more he began to build it, you find, and rather than the walls being open so that all of those that are outside that need to come in at Abba's directing, he began to close the door off until, if you go back and study it, he even alienated his own father and his mother, and not only that, but his own brothers. And so what Joseph literally did, Joseph prophetically set in motion a season when instead of building himself a house, he became a prisoner. And it was a prophetic situation that pointed to the day in front of him when Joseph would go into a pit And Joseph has been in the pit for a season. Joseph is about to come out now. And when Joseph comes out now, he's going to do what it says over in Isaiah 53 or 54, when Abba says, take the tent stakes, pull them up, and enlarge the tent stakes, because I am sending in a multitude. And the only reason Abba's going to do it, you need to grasp this, is because Joseph will be in a position then where he can adequately and appropriately handle the multitudes that are coming. Say amen. I want to point out something that I've been hearing in the Hebrew Roots community now for 30 years. Unity is going to be restored in the house. But there are very few that are willing to pay the price, and you've walked it. You guys have walked it. You understand what I'm talking about. Brenda and I have. We brought together two socially, economically, and racially diverse houses and put those two houses together in order to form one common house in union so that we could walk according to Yahweh's Torah. And I'm telling you, unity is coming to the house of Israel, and it cannot be stopped. And don't you be naive enough to think that the enemy does not understand that. He knows it better than you do. And so you have to expect unity to be attacked in every phase. And we were talking about it this morning. You can have disagreement in your house, but disagreement can never lead to division. If it does, then something is going to transpire that will set in motion a season of exile for both individuals, who, regardless of who. Strife and division are not tools of Joseph. Did you hear what I just said? I want to look at that verse in Ezekiel 37. I'm going to take two sticks and make them one. It comes from the Hebrew word etz, rendered tree, wood, or stick, but it's actually from the root etzah, which means to make something firm, to fashion it, but it can also indicate to shut, as in shutting your eyes. And when you see the latter part of that definition, to shut your eyes indicates, and Brenda and I were talking about this, it indicates that an individual has actually cultivated and began to develop and implement in their life a stiff-necked and rebellious attitude. And that goes along with the mindset of one who is about fomenting intentional deception. Listen to me. It's in the Hebrew Roots community. It's in the Messianic community. It's in the church. We cannot let it get in the house. We cannot let it get in the house of Joseph. The root of this word etzah is seen in numerous words throughout the Torah, indicating pain, hurt, toil, labor, injury, including the sorrow and hardship of what we were just singing about earlier, associated with idol worship. That same root is seen in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, describing the sorrow of conception that a woman would go through, as well as the sorrow bringing forth offspring, and finally, the root of a word that indicates the formation of a plan or a plot. I want you to remember this, because Abba understands that we have a tendency to be stiff-necked and hard-hearted. We can become very self-righteous and depart from true righteousness in a hurry. Are you hearing me? And I'll be honest with you, I don't even like to refer to myself as Hebrew Roots or Messianic anymore. And some of my brothers that are hearing this teaching may get offended with me, but I'm telling you, this is the truth. We've got to get past the point where we become those kind of individuals that is always looking to tear somebody else apart. We got to learn how to walk according to Yahweh's word. Listen to me. If you read what I'm sharing here from Ezekiel 37, two sticks are mentioned at the same time, and if you read that, you'll have to understand that they're segregated sticks. You understand what I just said? They're segregated. They're isolated from each other, and when they're isolated from each other, we know that they're going to be called together to bring unity to the whole house of Israel. And so if it's only in that unified place that they can accomplish the will of Yahweh, that as long as they're separated, listen to me, it tells me that neither is able to fulfill their potential. And so if we call ourselves Hebrew Roots, Messianic, Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, Pentecostal, whatever you want to call yourself, as long as we're segregated from our other brothers, regardless of what the future has declared, we have the potential to be, as long as we're segregated by division, neither one of us is able to fulfill the potential that Abba has called us to have. It's only when Yahweh takes and makes them one and Echad stick in his hand that the true purpose that Abba has called us for can be achieved. And I have to ask yourself, if that is the case, if I'm isolated from my brother for a season, regardless of what may be transpiring, if we have intentionally set ourselves against each other because of something that's caused a division between us, don't you think that it would follow along what's said in Genesis chapter 2 when Adam was said, it is not good for that man to be alone? That's in my notes here. Don't just brush past this. And my family will tell you that I have been guilty hundreds of times of saying, they will need me long before I ever need them. That hit me hard because all I did was expose myself as being the Joseph that had built the walls as tight around me as I possibly could, and I became an exclusive club. And Abba's began to deal with me. There are going to be people, and I'm telling you, it's already started in motion. Abba's going to be sending us to the church, and others from the church are going to be coming in for the express purpose of satisfying that passion and that hunger and that thirst. No wonder he's calling us remnant, meaning that there's a little bit left. And the remnant is always a choice remnant, a choice morsel, and manna. It's prophetic. This is what Abba's doing. Say amen. Look at that word above. It's a bone. It has a numeric value of 218, the same as the Hebrew word yerech for month or moon. And what I want to show you comes from Genesis 37, verse 9, and we're told that Jacob favored Joseph, and he favored him so much that he demonstrated that favor by giving him a coat of many colors. Look at this coat hanging on here. This is symbolic of what Joseph was given. And when he was given that coat, it didn't happen prior to that. Yeah, there were some, strife in the household, but it wasn't until he was given this coat. Some incidents began to happen, and it says that his brothers could no longer speak peaceably to him. How many of you know that there are people that we know, Remnant, Manna, United, that can't speak peaceably to us and their leaders in the same quote-unquote movement as we are, standing up here, beating their breasts, teaching the Torah. And I'm not trying to hammer anybody or point fingers at anybody, because when I point one finger, four of them's pointing back at me. I have been in that, and I stand here this afternoon asking for forgiveness and repenting publicly. I need help. I need to be the Joseph that is humbled and circumcised of heart. And that's my intent, to walk that way. And when I saw that they couldn't speak peaceably to their brother, I said, my goodness, there's something here. I need to go back and look at why being able to speak shalom to my brother is so important. And I saw some things in here, and I've been around teaching the Torah for a long time. And I saw things regarding this real simple word, very powerful word, very prevalent word in the Torah, shalom. Strong's number 7965, and it's most often translated as peace, soundness, health, completeness, and wholeness. However, the concept of this shalom points at a reconciliation. Listen to me. A reconciliation means two estranged individuals, two segregated individuals reconcile and come back together again. And when they come back together again, that point of reconciliation becomes a place where chaos has no room. And it doesn't matter. In my notes, you can see it for yourself. It doesn't matter if it's you as an individual. You can have peace here inside a troubled soul or a troubled mind, or it could be that the peace between you and some other individual has been tested, if you will. The moment that reconciliation takes place, the two come back together, and again, chaos, strife, division has no room. It cannot live. Shalom conveys the idea of being active and aggressive. Listen to this. You know, you hurt my feelings, man. You hurt my feelings. And because I got hurt feelings, I'm just going to wait until you get your act together and fix yourself and come back here and placate and pacify me. Shalom doesn't mean that. Shalom conveys the idea of being active and aggressive to ensure that neither circumstances nor the actions of others can determine whether you have peace or not. And I thought, oh my goodness, you think that maybe shalom is a choice of mine? That I can choose to walk in it or not? Do you think that maybe shalom could be similar to a garment that I can put on and take off at my will? I'm convinced that it is. And I also am convinced that Joseph walked in shalom. Listen to me, I want to make sure I qualify this. He walked in shalom throughout his trials. You can never really understand what true peace is, what true shalom is, if you're not going through some stuff. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, shalom. The numeric value, listen to this, of shalom is the same as the Hebrew word for Esau. And I'm here to tell you this afternoon, any relationship with Esau has the potential to be counterproductive to your shalom. Esau, and we've always pointed at Esau being part of the Roman vestige, part of the house of Jacob that's a counterfeit to the house of Joseph. But listen to me, Esau also is a shadow picture of the fleshly man that stands up and puts on the robes of Joseph and Jacob today. When the fleshly man and the fleshly carnal appetites, that the emotional individual that has to always feel good and be made to feel good, when that individual stands up and is demonstrating his actions while wearing this coat, listen to me, I'm telling you, you're going to find out that Esau's right there. There's a counterfeit in the house. Did you hear me? Did you know power and authority? Power and authority, which is what this robe, this garment represents. Power and authority are intoxicating when they're mixed with your flesh. An individual that understands the power and authority that's vested in standing behind the sacred platform and wearing a priestly garment, walking out the Torah, upholding the name of Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh, and demonstrating it in their life. If they're walking according to the flesh, let me tell you, you become an intoxicated individual and you're prone to getting misled. If you're walking according to the Spirit of Yahweh, you will hear His word and you will not lean to your own understanding, but in all your ways you will acknowledge Him and He will then direct your path. Say amen. And if you look at the framework that I've tried to establish regarding this word shalom, all you have to do is go back and research the beginning in Genesis chapter 3, and you'll find that the moment that Adam and Eve compromised in the garden, shalom died. You hear me? And from that time forward, in order to have shalom, there had to be bloodshed. And I believe from Genesis chapter 3 forward, it set in motion some ritualistic and traditional things that required the shedding of blood. Let me tell you this, the shedding of blood of bulls and goats could never appease and atone completely for a broken peace. All it could do was to put off access to peace until such time as the blood of our Messiah would be poured out and soaked in a garment. Are you listening? Shalom becomes the result of consequence. If you look at the word shalom, it comes from a Hebrew root, the Shin Lamed root, and it's only seen one time that I can remember, and it's when they're bringing back the Ark of the Covenant on the back of an ox cart. And the high priest, I believe his name was Uzzah. Uzzah knew how to handle that ark. He knew that it was being brought in the wrong way. He knew he was not supposed to touch it, but he compromised the Torah anyway, and when he did, the word that was used there is this same Sheen Lamed root. He committed a grievous sin that required death. Listen to me. Every one of us, the moment that we broke peace with him and we were born into conflict with Yahweh, King David said it, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Except and until we were reconciled with our Messiah, Yeshua, listen to me, there can be no peace. I can't achieve peace on my own because my blood being shed doesn't qualify me as an atoning instrument. It's only the blood of our Messiah, Yeshua, that can set me free. And so my sin and the consequences of my sin is how I achieve peace. It sounds almost as if it's contradictory. But the consequences of my sin caused our Messiah to have to come and stand in front of me when I deserved the judgment. He stands in front of me and he places his arms here and he takes the licks that were meant mine. That's what shalom is. That's what peace is. The root of shalom hints at something that is entire and whole. And it's only made whole because, listen to me, it's whole when it's taken all of the fragmented pieces, all of the broken pieces, all of the estranged and exiled pieces. This is hard for me to understand. It's like that alabaster box that was full of a precious ointment and it's broken, and the fragrance of it is used to anoint our Messiah. That's what shalom is. Shalom takes all of those fragmented and broken pieces and takes them and puts them back together. It's almost as if shalom can't exist unless it's broken. Sounds like our Messiah, doesn't it? And so, from the moment that Adam and Eve sinned, and that sin's passed down onto you and I, the only way that we can achieve shalom is access through the Messiah. The absence of shalom indicates that a breach has occurred. And I thought, oh my God. Did you know that Joseph is called to be a repairer of the breach? A restorer. A path to dwell in. And as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking the moment that Joseph's brothers are found not able to speak peace to him, let me just ask you, this was an indictment served against me. I'm thinking, how many times has there been instances between me and others that came into my circle of influence? How many times has there existed broken peace between us? And I could have went a little bit further to restore and to repair the breach. Are you hearing me? The moment that they're unable to speak peace to him, a breach happens in the house of Israel. And listen to me, this is what sets in motion the exile that they find themselves in later on in Egypt. The entire house of Israel was set into exile. The word breach there has a numeric value of 370, the same as the Hebrew word mashal, which means to rule over, and the word breach in Hebrew is written peretz. And a breach in the house of Israel was what allowed Pharaoh to govern. And how ironic that Pharaoh has the same root as the word for breach or to break, to rule over it. And when you look at the Hebrew word peretz, the Peresh root with the zadi on the end of it, the zadi represents righteousness, while the ayin hay root on paro means to bend or to twist. It hints at one whose mind is disturbed and distorted. And I'm telling you, Abba's been speaking to me now for 2 years regarding Romans chapter 12. Don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind, so that I can prove what is the good, acceptable, and perfect will of Yahweh. I'm telling you, Abba's going to cause us to begin to focus on how we can renew our mind, because where you are presently, I don't care who you are in the sound of my voice, where you are presently is a culmination of words and actions from your past that you have planted and produced and reaped the harvest from, and now you're standing where you're at because of that. If you're not content with that, then the only way you can change that and affect your household and the generations in front of you is to begin to change what's coming out of your mouth. And listen to me, what comes out of your mouth is not good enough, because James said, stop being just a hearer, be a doer as well. Are you hearing me? The moment that there's a breach in the house, and I'm telling you, this return to Torah movement, Hebrew roots, Messianic, and we saw it in the church. The moment that we begin to cultivate and build a house in a place that is built on division, what it literally does is exacerbate hope and prolongs our coming out of Babylon. The brother strife cultivated division, it destroyed the house, and stymies your exodus. How many of you want to come out of the house? How many of you want to get out of Exodus? Listen to me, we're going to learn how to get along. And it's interesting because in spite of them, let me just tell you this. In spite of you, in spite of me, Yahweh has plans for our restoration. And we know the story. The restoration was set in motion at the application of the lamb of the blood's lamb on the Passover door. But when there becomes a sharp disagreement between brothers, which leads to division, as in Joseph and the brothers here, listen to me, brothers in a household, that's why broken marriages are so difficult, because soul ties, and we've been there. My wife and I we're byproducts of that on both sides. We understand what it takes to put back together something that was fragmented and broken and see it made whole. Only Yahweh can do that. When there's brothers in a household and we have established soul ties and there's such a sharp contention and division between us that leads to a broken shalom, both parties experience a form of exile. We are incomplete without one another. And that's why when you bring a gift to the altar and you remember that you have aught against your brother, or vice versa, leave the gift at the altar and go repair the breach if possible. And let me share this with you. Joseph understood that. That's why Mashiach ben Yosef went straight to this altar. And I'm going to show you what the name of the altar was. And I'm going to show you that this altar is extremely powerful. And I'm going to show you that coming to this altar and this altar alone is the only way that we can see the house of Israel brought back together. And it happens that the name of this place is one of the names of Yahweh, Yahweh Shalom. And if you go back and look at how it's used, it is literally translated as Yahweh is Shalom. And I really appreciate Shepherd John, because he put a work together. You need to get that book. The 7 altar thrones in Genesis chapter 1:1, because it gives you some insight about how important it is to build altars and be a living altar yourself, and how those altars in your household. And I believe that this particular altar here is the most important, because peace died in Genesis 3. And the only way that we can be reconciled with peace is to come to this particular altar. And I believe that when it says Yahweh is Shalom, it infers that Shalom, listen to me carefully. I hope that I don't offend anybody. I believe that this infers that Shalom is a literal being. I believe that this particular being he manifests the DNA of Yahweh in a fleshly body, and that fleshly body was called the manifest word of Yahweh, the living man made flesh in the earth. His name is Yeshua, our Messiah. And I believe that apart from a relationship with Yahweh and Yeshua, it's impossible for you to truly experience what Shalom is. And I'm going to go one further. And I'm just going to ask you, those of you that are listening, those of you in the house, you don't have to raise your hand. You can if you want to. How many of you have been in situations in your life when you got into some kind of an argument or there was some kind of stress or maybe some kind of an offense and you felt this heaviness in your life and you just could feel it, you couldn't rest and you were struggling with it? How many in here? Every one of us. I'm here to tell you that the moment, listen, the moment that you sense that begin to enter your house, it's a Genesis 3. The Nakash is at the door. And if you're not careful and you allow that shalom to leave, let me tell you who just left. It was the presence of the Most High who just left you and also or your house. And the only way that you can get him back in the house, you have to extricate, you have to command the entity that caused that broken piece to leave the household. And it may be that you have to get yourself up like this and get him out, get a hold of your flesh. Because most of the time, the devil you face in the mirror is the one that's causing the problems. And if you don't do that, that instrument that has brought peace into your house, the direct result of the consequences of peace being broken, the one who shed his blood so that peace could be entertained and had in every individual's life and household, he is not going to come back until you make a reconciliation and restitution in that particular altar. That I had never heard that before. And it bothered me because there's been a lot of times when I was troubled by circumstances and situations. And how many of you felt this heaviness and man, you just struggle with it? And I realized that the moment that I did that, that he had left the household. And that disturbed me. I didn't really understand it, but I also learned that my flesh enjoyed cultivating that broken piece. And until I began to understand, if I wanted shalom in the house, something has to die. This man has to die. And I'm going to be honest with you, and I hope that you understand that. I can't ask Shepherd John to come and pick this thing up here and put me on the altar. I cannot ask Yahweh himself to leave his throne and pick me up and put me on the altar. There's only one individual that has the power and ability to put me on that altar to reconcile with him and cultivate shalom, and that is me. And I've often wondered, how come I stayed so long in those miserable conditions? How long is Joseph going to stay in an unreconciled relationship with Judah and Benjamin? How long, Joseph, are we going to be prideful and arrogant and beat our chest and say we're better than Judah? We're better than Benjamin. Most of us don't even know who Benjamin is. Say amen. How long are we going to stop dog talking and browbeating our church brothers? We used to say back home, why would I want to muddy the place I'm fishing in? I'm convinced that the door is about to open like never before. I want you to look with me at the origin of this place, Yahweh Shalom. It's found in Judges chapter 6, verse 24. For the sake of time, my goodness, I don't have a lot of time. You know the story is Gideon. Gideon is responsible for breaking down some altars. Isn't that interesting? We've been talking about altars this afternoon. It says, then Gideon built an altar there. Where? At this place. And I'm going to show you where the place is. And I'm going to show you that that place exists today. Built an altar there unto Yahweh, and he called it Yahweh Shalom. And unto this day, listen to me, until this day, it is yet. The altar of Shalom can be found in this one place. It can't be found anywhere else. It's found in Ophrah of the, hope I can say this right, Avi Ezrites. I want you to pay attention. The altar called Yahweh Shalom is still accessible in Ophrah of the Avi Ezrites. And I have to ask the question, do you think maybe Joseph and Judah or Benjamin are going to be able to find it? Let's look at the word Gideon. It's rendered hewer, one who cuts things down. And he's named that. It's interesting because he cut down or cut off the pagan Asherah poles and other idols. And I believe that if we would be honest with ourselves, the source of most division in our lives is the hidden idols that we have to deal with. And a lot of times, my biggest idol is my flesh. I placate I worship my flesh. I serve my flesh. So what was it that Joseph's brothers idolized that caused them to incubate such hatred towards Joseph? The word Ophrah is translated as fawn, as in a baby deer. Bad mistranslation. It actually comes from the Hebrew word afar, which means dust, and it's the same root found in Genesis chapter 3. And it's also the same etymological root, though it's written with an aleph, as the root of the word Ephraim. Where's that stick of Joseph at today? It's in Ephraim's hand. Did you hear what I just said? Okay? It leads me to believe thus far that Ephraim is going to be held responsible and accountable if he's going to be part of that stick that's rejoined, reconciled, enters into Shalom with Judah and Benjamin and the other brothers, that Joseph is going to have to be responsible for cutting off some of the idols. Are you hearing me? Avi Ezrites. You see the word Avi for my father, and the word Ezer to indicate to protect, to help, to succor, but it also indicates a girding, a surrounding, and a defending. Thus, when you destroy or cut off the idols in your life, you are finally, listen to me, when you begin to truthfully and aggressively seek this shalom, remember, you can't just passively go get it. You have to be aggressive. He is an entity, and the first place of having shalom and reconciliation is your relationship with the Messiah. And when you begin to aggressively seek that, it restores you to a pre-Genesis chapter 3 condition and puts you back in a condition as Adam and Eve were in Genesis chapter 2, where you have been born out of the dust or the Adama, the dust with the light or blood in it. And it's at that place called the Makom, at that final union, because when you go back to that condition, you are now unified with Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh yourself. And that place of reconciliation, that place of unity becomes the place known as the Makom. And when that happens, listen to me, shalom comes in spite of what kind of circumstance you may be going through. Access to the altar of Yahweh's shalom comes as a result. It is literally the consequence of something that is requiring judgment. And so we have to ask ourselves, what caused the absence of shalom between Joseph and his brothers? I want you to go and look with me in Genesis chapter 37, verse 3 and 4. And it says, now Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was a son of his old age. And if you stop there and just read that in the King James Version, you think, and he was 91 years old about this time, and you think that he really favored him and loved him because he was, the firstborn son of his favorite wife, and he was an old man. And because of that, sometimes when you're older, you have a tendency to, favor children. Maybe that's what it is. That's what it's implying here. And then it says, because of that, he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him. Listen to me. It's because of this coat that they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. I want you to look at several words with me. Before we get there, I want you to stop a minute and let's look at Joseph's coat, this ketonet pasim. And I want to show you who it's connected with. I want to show you how it relates to the Melchizedek priesthood and the legacy of one called Shem. And if you study the history, again, we don't have the time for it, but I can prove to you from the Torah that Jacob, Joseph's father, was a contemporary of Shem, who I believe was the high priest known as the Melchizedek. And it's interesting because he was the high priest of a place called Shalom. And so, listen, if that's the case, then the purpose of the Melchizedek priesthood is to be a mediator, one who brings peace and offers it to those who need to be reconciled to Yahweh. Are you following me? But not only was Jacob a contemporary, but most authorities believe that Joseph himself was also a contemporary with Melchizedek, also known as Shem, until the time that Joseph was sold into bondage, at least 17 years. And it's interesting because if you look at the phrase where it says that Jacob loves Joseph because he was the son of his old age, you have to ask yourself, why wasn't Benjamin favored? Why doesn't it say that Jacob loved Benjamin because Benjamin was the son of his old age? Listen to me. Jacob was older when Benjamin was born than he was when Joseph was born. Can y'all see that? Let's look at the phrase, because he was the son of his old age. The word because comes from a conjunction key that indicates since, indeed, for as much. But it also indicates a specific use of time, as in, at that time. So you could say, Joseph loved him because he was a son of his old age, or at that time. The word son is the word ban. It's defined as son, but it comes from the word banah, to begin to build, as in building a family name. And I'm thinking, well, how does this fit Joseph? Joseph is one of 12 brothers and one sister. And you go back and look at it, and our traditions say that it's simply because Joseph was favored by his father, and I don't believe it was specifically for that reason. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you that Joseph was favored because of grace. And a lot of our church brothers will have problems with this because in the church world we taught that we were saved by grace through faith, not of works, lest any man should boast. Well, how in the world could Joseph obtain favor without works that would merit the favor? Because if you go back and look at the word grace in its original context, it's the word chen, and it means you're favored by obedience. Are you following me? Okay? Let's look at the phrase old age. It's the word zachan. Now, if you look at it in the King James Version, it's translated as extreme or old age. But its true meaning indicates one that's mature, one that has wisdom, one that is capable of making proper decisions spiritually, and it's those capabilities that denote and garner his rank and his privilege, not simply because he's old. In other words, just because I'm 65 doesn't give me the rank and the privilege that I have. It has to come because of proper spiritual decisions, maturation, wisdom. And so if you go back and look at it, you remember Jacob by choice spent time in the tents of Shem, a school of Shem. And so if Joseph did also, he would have done it by choice, unlike his brothers. And so if you read this and you study it in the Hebrew language, you find that Joseph loved, the word for love there is ahav, and it literally means to love or to delight in. He delighted and loved Joseph because of Joseph's lifestyle choice. Did you hear it? The word ahav comes from a kindred root that indicates to put forth something, to germinate, to produce, to eagerly pursue an object. Joseph was favored because Joseph made the choice to submit himself to the instruction of Torah. And it was submitting himself to the instruction of Torah that garnered him the favor. Listen to me. You need to understand that, because if you're the house of Joseph, you're going to have to submit yourself to the Torah. Are you listening? And so if you read it, it literally says Jacob loved Joseph because at that time, Joseph was beginning to build the family name through wisdom and spiritual decisions that could only have been gleaned by having spent time in the tents of Shem. And it's interesting, if you go back and look at the evil report that was brought because of some of the brothers' actions later on, it's indicating that the brothers put no effort forth to carry on the family legacy. They understood that the house of Jacob, also known as Israel, was charged with keeping and propagating the Melchizedek priesthood, and none of the other brothers were willing to step up and accept the responsibility and the commitment required to walk in this, underneath this garment. Only Joseph at that time was willing to do so. That's why Joseph is favored. Jacob delighted in Joseph because he fervently sought after the Torah, whereas the brothers seemed more interested in other carnal things. Now let me share this with you. If that was the case, then it would naturally follow that all of the garments, what is it that you see when a policeman pulls you over? If he walks up in civilian attire without a badge, what does that say to you? Not much. But if he walks up in a uniform with a badge on, there's something associated with the uniform and the badge that calls you to honor it because you understand there's authority and responsibility inside that office. That's what was there inside the Melchizedek priesthood, and this is what that garment or coat of many colors represented. And it would be quite natural for the Melchizedek priesthood and the role of that priesthood, which was both kingly and priestly, to be passed down to the individual that would step up and commit himself to fulfilling that obligation in his life. And so it wasn't that Jacob just arbitrarily had this thing made up and gave it to his favorite son. It was, this thing had already been made up. I believe Jacob had worn it, and then he passes it on down to the one that would stand up and get in that office and submit himself to the counsel of Yahweh. It wasn't that Joseph was hated as much as what this tunic of Melchizedek represented. And I'm convinced that's what caused his brothers to despise it and what it represented. And the moment that he stepped in and became the policeman of the Torah, that's when they hated him. Do you see that? And I'm convinced that the hatred was fostered because of that. And I'm telling you that the same thing is happening today among the sons of Israel. Jacob and his sons, the house of Joseph, is despised because we are espousing the authority of the Melchizedek priesthood. Listen to me. And that priesthood can only be found in the high priestly work of Messiah ben Yosef. Are you listening? Let's look at that phrase for coat of many colors. The word coat, ketonet. It's usually translated as a long tunic, usually of linen. And I'm going to show you something pretty interesting, especially as it regards a linen garment, and why linen was the garment for the priesthood. If you remember, Adam and Eve were created and enshrouded with literal garments of light until they fall in Genesis chapter 3. And when they find out that they're naked of what? They're naked of that original garment of light. Okay? And they have to try and clothe themselves with another skin, which is the fleshly, carnal skin. And because of that, temporarily inside this skin body, this tabernacle body, is a thing called blood. Blood is congealed light. There's going to come a day when the light will be restored to these fleshly bodies. There will no longer be flesh and blood bodies. They will be light bodies, just like our Messiah Yeshua had. Okay? Now, linen has a frequency of 5,000 hertz, 50 times the body of man's frequency. It is an aid that helps in receiving and transmitting light. Did you hear that? The whole concept of the priesthood as a mediator between Yahweh and man is that his duties require him to bring healing, reconciliation, restoration, shalom to all those that are sick, and disease. Listen to me. Disease begins in the body when the frequency hits 50 or below. And it's interesting because the number 50 is the value of the letter nun, which means life, and also the value of the phrase Adama. And so as long as we're separated from that original Adama and the source of life, the only way that we can have access back to that life-restoring entity is to walk in that garment of light that we put on called Yeshua our Messiah. I don't know if this is making sense to us. The linen garment, listen to me, serves to protect the priest from contagion. How many of you are concerned about this next flooding of COVID? It's coming. Oh, it's going to be a lot worse than the one that started in 2020. Very well may be. But if you put on this garment of the Melchizedek priesthood, the garment of light, I'm telling you, it will serve to protect the priest from contagion. And it will also, as I come into, and Shepherd John shared some powerful supernatural miracles that occurred while they were down in California. When you put on that garment of light and you come in contact with someone who has a contagion in their body, that light in you will be released into them, and that affects the healing and reconciliation and restoration and shalom in their lives. The word ketanet comes from the root kataf, which means shoulder, to cover. Isn't that interesting? Because Joseph's inheritance lies between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal in a place called Shechem, literally representing the shoulders. The garment was supposed to rest on the shoulders of an individual capable of demonstrating the power and light inherent in this priestly garment. Say amen. The root stem, the tav pei, points, this is what was mind-staggering to me. It points at the setting for jewelry, like a ring, a wedding ring or wedding band. It indicates the sockets that jewels are set in. But it also is specifically used of the priestly garments, and it's interesting that Joseph, by wearing this ketanet pasim, when he put this garment on, and when I'm telling you, Benjamin could have done it, Reuben could have done it, should have been the one. Judah could have done it, Simeon, Levi, any one of those could have stepped into the tents of Shem and picked up this garment. This garment identified whoever wore it as a jeweled setting where the crown of Elohim would sit on it. And the crown of Elohim would be seen in that household, and it would be flashing brilliantly to all of those that would see that, and it would be emanating the frequencies of light that would bring healing to all of those that came in contact with it. It's seen in words that indicate beauty and glory, and it's also interesting that both Isaiah and Ezekiel speak of a future stripping away of this very glory and authority. Jeremiah 25 says that there's going to be a shattering and a breaking away of the authority of the shepherds or the leaders of Israel. Oh my goodness. That happened. The word colors from the word pasim. The word pas is defined as hand or foot, palm or sole. The King James translators use it to indicate the length of the garment. In other words, it would have extended down to the wrists and down to the ankles. But I believe that it inferred far more than that. I believe that it actually implies the authority and responsibility as well, because the hand or the foot, it represents the word kaf, which is the identifying mark of ownership and title. And the word pasim is from the root of the word pasas, which means something that's caused to cease or to fail, to disperse. And it's interesting because it's also the root of the word Pesach. I'm convinced that when the children of Israel applied the blood to the doorpost of their houses, and we memorialize this every year during the Pesach celebration, I believe that the one that stood between them, represented by that blood on the doorpost, would have actually been wearing the priestly garments of the Melchizedek order. And when he stood there, he stood in front of them and he covered all of the imperfections and blemishes that were inside the household. The Kethanet Pasim was a prophetic declaration that left no doubt regarding the future role of anyone in the house. Listen to me. How many of you are expecting or anticipating to put on this Melchizedek garment? It left no doubt of the future role of anyone in the house who would accept the responsibility of wearing that garment and walk out the Torah in his or her life. And Joseph was the only son in the house that aspired towards it. It also indicated that he would be the crown of the house, having been specifically set in a place like a jewel inside the setting of a ring that only the Melchizedek priesthood could suffice as his covering. It says that Joseph would be resplendent with glory, power, and authority, but it also indicates, because of the things that Yahweh was prophetically setting in motion, that there would come a temporary stripping away of that garment of Joseph's, while Joseph would be allowed to take on the failures and imperfections of his own brothers, and then that would also typify the coming of our Messiah ben Yosef, who would do the very same thing. And listen to me, that rehearsal has a final future prophetic fulfillment in front of us, because listen to me, Joseph, if you want to come up here and take on this Kethanet Pasim, you're going to have to be willing to stand up and cover the imperfections that we find in our brothers until such time as the house is restored. This is pretty serious business. If you don't think it was important, I'll show you how Joseph demonstrated. Joseph understood what it was like to be in that prison. And so what he does, he brings his brothers in front of him, and he demonstrates the very same thing prophetically. He shows them what it's like to be in prison. And he does it by deliberately, and the King James English says it, before their eyes. He takes the one called Simeon. What does Simeon mean? To be able to hear. But you also have to remember, in front of their eyes. So what he's telling them, listen to me, is that he's going to take the hearing, the ability of the house of Israel to hear. It's going to be put into prison for a season. And he's warning them in the process with this prophetic declaration, this demonstration in front of them, that their ability to see and their ability to hear had been and in the future would again go into captivity because they failed to recognize that priesthood. And he's demonstrating that Yeshua would later restore it by healing the ear of the Levitical priest servant called Malchus. He was the servant of Caiaphas. I can prove to you that Caiaphas was a Benjamite. The word Malchus is a word that indicates king or kingdom. And it's interesting because the ear of this servant called Malchus, representing the kingdom, is cut off. And who cuts it off? Shimon, one of the brothers in the house, cuts off the ability of the other brother in the house to hear. How many of us may have been guilty of that? Think about it. And what I saw here, I'd never seen before, but the cutting off of the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest, is actually demonstrating a ritual that was very powerful, found all the way back in Deuteronomy 15, chapter 15, verse 17. And in that particular case, an individual who had been a slave or a servant for 7 years is offered an opportunity to go free. If he chooses to remain in the house, he puts his ear to the door, and an awl is bored through or pierces that ear. And it indicates that the covenant between the master and the servant is still in force. What Shimon Kephas, Simon Peter, is doing, he's telling us that this counterfeit priesthood of both the master, Caiaphas, and the parallel in his servant, which was demonstrating the current status of the exiled house of Israel, that covenant relationship is about to be severed. And I'm telling you, you and I are in a position right now today when that same covenant relationship, we really took it and put that ear back. Oh, you said Yeshua restored the hearing? Yes, he restored the ability to hear, but a lot of us went outside into the fleshly side of it, and what we really found ourselves doing was putting our ear back to the doorpost and becoming a servant of the false one, religious one. And now that ear, that covenant is about to be severed once again. And let me share this with you. As soon as Yeshua takes that severed ear of Malchus, what he has done, because it's showing you that the priestly order, the Levitical order, is also cut off. And so what Yeshua did, there's only one way that you can reconcile this situation and achieve shalom. And so what he does is he takes that ear and puts it back on the kingdom and restores the Melchizedek priesthood to the house of Israel. And it's confirmed in just a short period of time because he is placed on the altar of Shalom. And if you don't think that that was his ultimate message, the first thing that is said regarding the announcement of the nativity of our Messiah when he is born into the earth was by a messenger host that said, Shalom. Shalom on the earth, peace and goodwill has now been opened. The opportunity and the way is open and provided for the people. If you look at that phrase, the coat of colors, Ketanet Pasim, the value of it, 140, the word pas, indicates the same value as the word miyamim, which means after 2 days. In other words, the third day. That same third day reckoning of time is consistent in each of the links that we've talked about earlier today. In Shechem, where Shechem and his countrymen were destroyed 3 days after the incident with Dinah. Joseph is 3 days in the pit. 3 days of darkness fell on Egypt. Yeshua goes 3 days into the bowels of his grave. Ironically, his is the only garment that is not torn. And prophetically, it speaks in Hosea 6:1 of the day that you and I are living in, because it says, after 2 days, he's going to revive us. How? Because reconciliation has been offered to you, and that is going to revive you. Revive something that's dead or died. Excuse me. In the third day, he's going to raise us up, and we will live in his sight. And if you want to know more about how and why they despised him and his garments, I believe I've offered you enough proof that this represented the priestly order of Melchizedek. But the priestly demonstration of this garment being passed on is seen in the text of 2 Samuel 13, verse 19, because the same phrase, ketonet pasim, is used. And in 2 Samuel 13, 19, the daughter of King David called Tamar, not Judah's Tamar, but Tamar. It's interesting because she is the daughter of not only King David, but she has a brother who is old. The oldest son is Amnon. We're going to look at that. Amnon is the son of David's first wife, who was a political marriage. Her name was Michael. And she was a Benjamite. So here's Benjamin figuring again prominently in this thing that we're looking at. And so if you go back and read it, she was a virgin, the daughter of King David. She is found raped by her half-brother Amnon, and she is found tearing that ketonet pasim that she wore. And most people will argue and say there's no way that she's connected to the priesthood. And in fact, if you go back and study history for the last couple of hundred years, there's been a tremendous bias against any female, any woman, occupying the role of the priesthood. And I can prove to you that there were priests throughout the Torah that were women, and there are actually examples in other ancient texts to prove the same. I'm convinced that Tamar not only held both a role as the daughter of King David, but I believe she also held a priestly role, and I believe that she served as an apothecary. An apothecary is an individual who specializes in using healing ointments to restore health and life to the people, which was what the priest was supposed to do. And it's interesting because it follows that she is instructed by King David to go into her brother Amnon and make for him meat, to prepare something special for him. If you read the King James English, you think, well, she just went in and fixed him a T-bone or a ribeye. Yeah, but that's not what it says in the Hebrew language. And by the way, I have something that I inserted here. I know of one person today, one lady today, who stands in this role of an apothecary that I believe has a connection both to the royal side of the lineage and the priestly side, and that's Rivka Sari. And Rivka also is an apothecary. And her life's mission has been to offer healing and to bring healing to the nations. And it's not only that, but she is a Messianic Jew. And sadly to say, a few weeks back when I was teaching, some people took some of the things that I said and literally attacked this precious woman and denigrated her to no end. And I'm here to tell you that we stand wholeheartedly with Rivka, and that she is part of the restoration of this house of Yahweh. She and the group that she represents, and I'm going to show you who I believe it is in just a little while. If y'all can hold on, I got 14 minutes. Moreover, some additional evidence can be found regarding who I believe was also part of the priestly lineage, and that's Dinah, Joseph's sister. It parallels what happens here with King David's daughter Tamar. Now, again, you can go and look at Hammurabi's Code, paragraph 146, and see that. Let me ask you this. King David gives her a specific instruction. Go and take meat and bring it to your brother. If you look at that word meat in the Hebrew, it's the word birya. It comes from a root that, yeah, somebody got excited. It comes from a root that hints at taking, it's actually related to the role of the priest because it's indicating taking a sacrificial victim and cutting it in two. And that word is used consistently with the duties of an individual who would function as a priest and also a healer, because what she's doing here is not that she's taking a T-bone and separating it, bringing it to her brother. She's actually fixing a concoction or a potion, if you will, that would bring in and affect healing in her brother's life. And it's also not an accident that Tamar is both a princess and a priest, and because of that, her virginity is extremely important to functioning in both roles. That's why the house of Joseph today has got to function as the virgin bride of Yahweh, espoused or giving ourselves, adulterating ourselves to no other God but Him. And as a result of her virginity being taken from her, she tears her garments in response to her brother Amnon's assault. And that's the same thing that happens in Caiaphas' day. The moment that she severs that ketonet pasim, listen to me carefully, it's actually severing that priestly role that she would function in, and she could not step back in that. Caiaphas does the same thing. Caiaphas severs his role, rips that robe, and when he does, it indicates that the office is now vacated. Caiaphas nor Annas can step back into that role. That priestly office is now vacated. And the same thing was attempted with Joseph when Joseph's brothers took the garment. And when Joseph is in Potiphar's house, Potiphar's wife, go back and read it, she takes the garments of Joseph and snatches them from them. See, this is a continuous pattern throughout the Torah. And in every case, the tearing of the garment caused the stripping away of the authority of the house of Israel. And after our Messiah, Yeshua, is executed on the stake, he restores the Melchizedek order. His garments are not torn. They're gambled over, but not torn. And I found it really interesting that the pinnacle garment of the Levitical priesthood in that temple that was standing right in front of his gaze was rent from the top to the bottom, just like the high priest's vestment was ripped. It was effectively declaring for all of the known world that the Levitical order has been superseded by that of the return of the Melchizedek priesthood, and the king and priest was functioning in that office from that time forward until this day, and he is standing at the right hand of the Father waiting until his enemies are subjugated. And those of us that put on the Messiah Yeshua put on this garment of the priest and king, and we're to walk in the earth in his stead just as he did. Let me skip down a little bit further. I want to look at Joseph and Judah and Benjamin. Now, after we look at the attack upon Tamar by David's son Amnon, you can see some other information supporting what Joseph is doing in our parshah. The word Amnon is defined as faithful in here, but the root of it comes from the root Ammon, which is indicating support, confirm, or uphold, but it's also interchangeable with Strong's number 541, the same word that means to take the right hand, like Yamin, Benjamin. This man, Amnon, was also a Benjamite. It means to come to the crossroad. And when you get to the crossroad, you immediately take the right hand. You go to the right hand. He was named that. It was a prophetic declaration over him by his father, King David, who fully expected the firstborn of his house to take the right road, to take on the mantle of the king, to walk in divine Torah righteousness. Okay? Ironically, it's the same root as that of the word Benjamin. Benjamin was the remaining son of Jacob and Rachel, whom Joseph longs to see. And so Benjamin, just like Amnon, Jacob knew what he was doing when he named Benjamin, because he understood that Benjamin would also be charged with doing the same thing that's being told of King David's son here. Come to the crossroads, always make the right turn. If you don't turn right, you get left. Joseph longs for his younger brother, and he's intent to both bring forth a present and a future prophetic revelation that is going to foster the unity in the house of Israel once again. And you can find that. Brittany was talking about it last week, and she just covered just about everything that I got. You can find that in Genesis 44, verse 2, when he tests his brothers, and he says, put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, and his corn money. And he did according to the word Joseph had spoken. Now, if you look at the word cup, it comes from the word gavia, but it's also the same root as the word gavah, which is one of the cities allocated to the house of Benjamin. But it's also the very same place where Benjamin would one day commit a heinous crime, and all of the household of Benjamin be completely annihilated, but 600, I believe, of the sons. The word kasef is translated here as silver or money, but it actually comes from a term that means to long for or to yearn after, to eclipse or to darken as the sun, to darken your eyes. And if you look at the root stem, the word soph, it means a threshold or a basin as an indentation at the threshold of the doorway for blood to catch. The word soph, Yosoph, Joseph, is where this root comes from in Joseph's name. It indicates to be a doorkeeper. We think of a doorkeeper as being a servant. I'd rather be a servant in the house. I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house. But a doorkeeper or servant in the house is a priest. Okay? The soph represents the threshold. The threshold, listen to me carefully, the threshold is the place where the house either begins or it ends. If you're coming in, the house is beginning for you. If you're going outside the threshold, the house is ending. That's why you have to understand the blood has to be applied upon the doorposts of the house, because whoever comes inside the place where the blood's applied, you're in the house. If you're not, if you're on the opposite side, you're outside the house. It's about access. The word Yosef is about access to the inside of the house of Israel. And Joseph is crucial right now to access to the united house that we see in Ezekiel chapter 37. The word for corn, put it in his sack where he has his corn. It's the word shaver. Brittany taught on it last week. It's translated as corn, but that's not the usual word. It's actually the word that means to be broken, a breach, or a fracture. But it can also indicate the solution or interpretation of a dream, the destruction of a kingdom, to measure something, often to define it. We get our English word sever as in sever arm, sever relationship from this word right here. And if you remember, that's what Gideon did. Gideon was a hewer. He was a shaver. He was an individual that cut off things that was offensive to the kingdom. And it's interesting because there's another key word found here, and it's the word for divineth. Joseph said, don't you know you stole my cup? Don't you know that I'm the kind of man that can divine? And everybody that you read, all the commentaries will say he was just using that to kind of mess with him a little bit and make him think that he had divined it in the cup. That's not what's being said. It's not what is being said. It's the root of the word. It actually comes from the word nakash, to practice divination. Joseph did not practice divination. And if you go back and read in Genesis chapter 44, verse 5 and verse 15, it's repeated twice. It's emphasizing something to Benjamin and those brothers sitting there. They knew the word nakash from Genesis chapter 3. They also understand the numeric value of nakash is the same as that of Mashiach, Messiah. It's an established fact that Joseph longed for his brother Benjamin. But the significance of the attention that's paid here indicates that Joseph is warning Benjamin of his future, where his house would be eclipsed and darkened, and he would be separated from his beginning. And this would cause a fracture or a breach in the house of the Israel, where the enemy would gain hold until the coming of the Messiah who would restore him. And though Joseph is grieving with him, he's also rejoicing with Benjamin through this prophetic demonstration of the return of his house through the Messiah. So who is part of this union in the last days? Judah and Joseph, we acknowledge. But Benjamin's very prominent. So I had to ask myself, and I've looked high and low, inside and out, left and right in the Torah, and I've not found anybody that can tell me prophetically who Benjamin represents in the days ahead. Benjamin, that's the son of the right hand. Yeshua standing at the right hand of the Father. That's Benjamin. And I understand that sometimes there can be some dual interpretation, dual references. It's my opinion that it's put here in this particular manner because Benjamin is not Judah. And Benjamin is not Joseph. Yet Joseph is prophetically declaring the acceptance of Benjamin's acceptance of Messiah. Joseph is prophetically declaring that Benjamin is going to, in the day in the future, come to the crossroad and Yamin, turn to the right and accept Yeshua. And it's also kind of interesting that throughout the Torah, Benjamin is known as a warrior, one skilled in battle. And I'm sitting over there at my desk, and my head is swelling, and it's smoking, and I'm thinking, who is Benjamin? And the most unlikely source spoke to me in a still small voice in the corner. Hey, David. I said, what, Brenda? She said, I just realized something. Benjamin didn't have a mother. Rachel died while giving birth to Benjamin. We have Benjamin, Judah, Joseph. Judah has a mother. Joseph's mother was Rachel. She asked me in that particular time, and this could have only come, I would have never thought of this, it could only come from a woman who sits in a priestly office. She said, from what breast would Benjamin have been nursed from? And I thought, oh my God. And you know what tradition says? But I don't believe that tradition is right. The place, the breast that Judah and Joseph derived their sustenance from was denied Benjamin. Talmudic Judaism right now is the mother of Judah currently, and it has been for millennia. Joseph's mother has been the church until recently. Is it possible that Benjamin represents those from Judah and his companions, though they are Jewish, that have turned to the right hand, the son of right hand as their source, and are now Messianic Jews? Not truly Joseph, not truly Judah. Is it possible that Benjamin could be the hidden source in the land today who will be able to stand up and defend Judah from future peril while we're waiting on Joseph to get there? Joseph is not Judah. Joseph is not Jewish. And I'm telling you, if you go back and read it, it was not until there was an encounter with Judah and Joseph regarding Benjamin that it caused Judah to recognize and acknowledge who Joseph was. Is it possible that Judah will only recognize Joseph when his life is in jeopardy, and only after he has further acknowledged Benjamin? Benjamin is going to be there in the land with him, and the Messiah of Benjamin will come to the forefront as a deliverer, and they will acknowledge, oh my gosh, the Messiah of Benjamin is the same Messiah that these outcast and dispersed individuals that have been crazy for 2,000 years have been calling their Messiah. And I believe because of the relationship restored between Judah and Benjamin, that it will collectively cause them to turn to Joseph and recognize the Messiah that is Joseph's. And the house will be reunited. I'm convinced that the union of the house the stage is being set for it as we speak. As I said to you earlier, in his young and immature days, Joseph, targeted and tasked and challenged with building the house, began to build the walls closer and closer. And that happens sometimes. Shepherd John and I, we've been in the ministry a long time, and we've been attacked. We've had people come and go and assail our character. And sometimes you think it's self-preservation, so you just pull the walls in until you know that this is a safe place of protection. And let me just share this with you. What you've done is we've actually created ourselves a prison, and Joseph went into that very prison where Joseph was by himself. And it wasn't until Joseph recognized the deliverer who was capable of getting him out of that pit that Joseph broke those walls down and was able to embrace his household. And that's where we are today. Joseph, do you live? Oh, Joseph Kai. Oh, Joseph Kai. Hope you enjoyed this teaching. Thank you. Shalom.